Welcome to this episode of WikiWalks, a short podcast devoted to some of the more intriguing and, who knew, articles that you can run across in the weird world of Wikipedia. I'm your host, Chris Grismer. There's no doubt that in your life, you've met someone who you thought was just an all-around bad A, a real man's man. But let me tell you, friend, you never met Mad Jack Churchill, a British soldier who earned the moniker for fighting in World War II, armed only with a longbow, bagpipes, a kilt, and an English broadsword. Born in 1906 in Hong Kong, John Malcolm Thorpe Fleming Churchill was the son of Alec, a quiet public works director. Jack would often explore all the rural areas around the city, and when his family moved back to England in 1917, his thirst for adventure only grew. It was during this time he also learned and began to excel in archery. He graduated from the Royal Military College in 1926 and moved to Burma with the Manchesters, a storied British regiment with battle honors dating back to the 18th century. He would often take to riding his motorcycle the entire length of the country, exploring what it had to offer. Also, because that evidently didn't fill up all of his time, he decided to learn the bagpipes. However, early to mid-1930s Britain was largely void of major military conflicts, and Jack left the army for greater adventure, moving to Nairobi, Kenya, where he was a newspaper editor and male model. He also honed his archery skills and took second place in the World Championships in Oslo, Norway for Britain, and placed second in the World Piping Championships. I mean, who among us has not at least placed top 5 in that? He even moonlighted as an actor due to his skill with the longbow, appearing in the movie The Thief of Baghdad. However, World War II loomed large, and Churchill rejoined the military to serve God and country. He accompanied the expeditionary forces and set sail for France. If you recall from the Battle of Dunkirk, the stranded English were nearly surrounded by the German army. But Jack led his men armed with only an English broadsword and a longbow. The war diary of the 4th Infantry Brigade, to which Churchill's battalion belonged, commented on this extraordinary figure. One of the most reassuring sights of the embarkation from Dunkirk was the sight of Captain Churchill passing down the beach with his bows and arrows. His high example and his great work were a great help to the 4th Infantry Brigade. After ambushing a German patrol, Churchill signaled his attack by shooting a Nazi sergeant through the chest with an arrow, immediately followed by a hail of gunfire from 2 fellow infantrymen in tow. His shot earned him the title of the only soldier to have felled an enemy with a longbow during the war. When asked why he did this, he answered, "Any officer who goes into action without his sword is improperly dressed." At no time will I, nor you, my beloved listener, say anything cooler than that. However, in the retreat he was shot in the neck by a machine gunner. He did not tend to his wounds, but instead carried a fellow wounded soldier back to the British line, earning a military cross for bravery. He was sent to fight in Norway in 1941 as a commando. His troop landed, and he played the March of the Cameramen on his bagpipes, waving his broadsword high in the air above his head, leading his men into battle. Again, this is the 1940s. This is not William Wallace. A kilted Englishman, armed with a longbow, a broadsword, and bagpipes, stormed the beaches into battle. He decisively won the victory and received his 2nd military cross. He then was sent to Italy to fight in Salerno. He ordered his men into 6 parallel columns in the middle of the night. The area they were fighting in was overgrown, so his counterattack had no chance of catching the Germans by surprise. So he went with a different approach. Mad Jack told his men to scream "Commando!" as loud as they could as they attacked. This prevented them from shooting each other in the pitch-black night and completely confused the Germans. All total, Churchill and his men took 136 prisoners and accomplished all of their objectives. Of this event, Mad Jack was quoted as saying, "I maintain that as long as you tell a German loudly and clearly what to do, if you are senior to him, he will cry 'Jawohl!' and get on with it enthusiastically and efficiently, no matter the situation." It was during the same campaign that Churchill decided to sneak out from the camp one night with his corporal. As they walked toward the town in hopes of catching a German or two, they heard a few German soldiers digging all around them. Guided by only the glow of a cigarette, they managed to surprise 2 of them. Churchill coming out of the darkness with his sword drawn. He ordered the men to put their hands up and they complied. He left one prisoner with his corporal and took the other one with him. He used his prisoner as a shield as he carefully went to the other Germans digging and ordered them to surrender to his sword. By the end of it, he took 42 more prisoners and marched them all the way back to enemy lines, carrying their own weapons, mortars, and bombs, and dragging their wounded in a cart. Churchill stated that he always made his prisoners carry their own weapons because it slowed them down. He just made sure to take their rifle bolts out. Ovs. In 1944, he was in Yugoslavia leading his commandos yet again, and given a seemingly impossible mission. Mad Jack was given orders to raid the island of Brac, which was then held by the Germans. He put together a ragtag force of 1,500 partisans and the 43 and 40 commando units. At the attack, Churchill led the 40 commandos and the 43 commando, while the partisans stayed at the landing area. Only Churchill and 6 other men made it to their objective. Churchill was still playing Will Ye No Come Back Again on his now famous bagpipes when a mortar shell killed the other 6. He was knocked unconscious by a grenade and captured. He was interrogated later in Berlin because they thought he was related to the other Churchill. Just to let you know, he wasn't. Before being sent to the Sachsenhausen concentration camp. In 1944, September, not long after being imprisoned, Churchill and a fellow RAF officer managed to crawl under the prison wire and then through an abandoned drain. The men had hoped to make it to the Baltic coast, but they were captured again. In April 1945, he was transferred with 140 other prominent prisoners to Tyrol, a concentration camp that was guarded by the SS. The prisoners were eventually released, and Churchill walked all the way to Italy, where he met an American armored force. Still not done with the war, Churchill was sent to Burma to fight in the Pacific Theater. By the time he reached India, the war was over, and Churchill lamented the sudden ending by saying, "If it wasn't for those damn Yanks, we could have kept the war going for another 10 years. After the war, Churchill remained in the army until he retired in 1959. He passed in 1996 at the age of 89. Until you run into battle blaring the bagpipes, swinging a sword and felling Nazis with a bow and arrow while wearing a plaid skirt, you best check yourself and pour a pint out for perhaps the most lethal gentleman of all time, Mad Jack Churchill."